The court gave him everything. The house, the restaurant, the reputation she'd spent 8 years building. But Brennan made one mistake. He assumed the woman he'd discarded had nothing left to fight with. She signed the divorce papers 3 days before the Michelin inspectors were scheduled to arrive, the career-defining visit her husband had spent a decade chasing, and his former business partner, sitting in a car outside, couldn't stop smiling. The conference room smelled like cold coffee and inevitability. Layla sat perfectly still, hands folded on the glass table, watching the attorneys shuffle papers. Brennan's lawyers slid the final document across with the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. On paper, he had. Layla lost the townhouse in Lincoln Park, the investment accounts, 8 years of marriage reduced to a 10-year-old Subaru and a studio apartment in a part of Chicago she'd never visited. Brennan sat across from her, practically vibrating with barely contained joy. His foot tapped, his fingers drummed. He kept glancing at his phone, probably texting his mistress updates in real time. She signed her name, Layla Whitley, soon to be Layla Chan again. Her attorney gathered the papers without a word. They both knew she'd been outgunned from the start. Brennan stood first, extended his hand to shake hers, like this was a business deal, like they hadn't shared a bed for 8 years, like she hadn't built everything he was celebrating taking from her. She didn't take his hand. She walked through the marble lobby, past security, into the bitter December air. Her old Subaru was parked 4 blocks away. But she didn't walk toward her car. She stopped at the curb. Waited. A black Range Rover pulled up exactly on time. The window rolled down, revealing a face Brennan would recognize immediately. Theo Marchetti, 2 Michelin stars in Milan, the kind of recognition Brennan had dreamed about his whole career, one of the most respected chefs in the world, the man Brennan had pushed out of their original restaurant 9 years ago because he refused to share credit. Theo smiled at Layla. Not polite, warm. She climbed in. Behind her, still on the courthouse steps, Brennan had stopped moving. His phone was halfway to his ear, his mouth hung open. The color drained from his face as the Range Rover pulled away. He thought he'd won. He thought she had nothing left. He had no idea what he'd just signed away. 3 days until the inspectors arrived, and by then it would be far too late to undo what she had already set in motion. 3 days later, the kitchen would be silent, plates lined up. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now let's continue. 8 years earlier, Layla Chen was 27 years old and working as a sommelier at a mid-tier steakhouse in the West Loop. She'd graduated from Cornell's hospitality program with honors, had completed a stage at a 3-star restaurant in Lyon, and had developed a palate that older sommeliers quietly envied. But the restaurant industry in 2016 wasn't exactly rolling out red carpets for quiet, introverted women who preferred cellars to cocktail parties. She met Brennan Whitley at a wine tasting event, not a fancy one, a cramped gathering in a distributor's warehouse where industry people came to taste samples and gossip. She was taking notes on a Burgundy that the sales rep had criminally underpriced. He was nursing a glass of something red and pitching his vision to anyone who'd listen. Most people wouldn't listen. Brennan was charming, sure, but he was also clearly broke, clearly desperate, and clearly operating on more ambition than substance. But Layla listened. His idea wasn't bad, actually, a farm-to-table fine dining concept that would showcase regional Midwest ingredients, the kind of restaurant that could put Chicago on the map alongside New York and San Francisco. The market was there. The concept was solid. The problem was that Brennan couldn't execute any of it alone. He admitted this freely, laughing at himself, running his hair through that way that made him look boyish and vulnerable. He said he'd been looking for the right partner for months. Everyone wanted control he couldn't share. Everyone wanted to dilute his vision. Layla should have walked away. She had enough problems without adopting someone else's restaurant dreams. But there was something about the way he looked at her when she started explaining how she'd structure the supplier relationships, how she'd build an exclusive network of local farmers, how she'd develop a wine program that would make critics weep. His eyes went wide. He leaned forward. He said the words that would change everything. "You're brilliant. You know that, right? I've talked to dozens of people in this industry, and none of them think like you do." Nobody had ever called her brilliant before. Not like that, not with that much conviction. 3 months later, they were dating. 6 months after that, they signed the lease on a space in Fulton Market that would become Sable. A year later, they were married in a small ceremony at the Cook County Courthouse. Neither of them could afford a real wedding, but Brennan promised her they'd renew their vows in Paris once the restaurant earned its first star. That promise would never be kept. What Layla didn't know, what she wouldn't learn until much later, was that Brennan had already burned one partner before her. Theo Marchetti had been his culinary school classmate, and together they'd developed the original concept for Sable in late-night sessions fueled by cheap wine and expensive dreams. But Theo wanted to build slowly and focus on craft. Brennan wanted to move fast and chase glory. They fought. Theo returned to Italy. Brennan kept the concept. He never mentioned Theo to Layla, not once in 8 years. What happened next would change everything. The restaurant grew, slowly at first, then explosively. Layla worked 18-hour days building the infrastructure that nobody saw. She developed relationships with farmers in Wisconsin, Indiana, and downstate Illinois. She negotiated exclusive contracts with foragers who supplied high-end restaurants across the country. She built a wine program that sommeliers from other cities flew in just to experience. And then there were the recipes. Brennan was a competent cook. Good technique, solid fundamentals, the kind of chef who could execute someone else's vision flawlessly. But creation, true creation, wasn't his gift. That was Layla's. She had what the French called un palais d'or, a golden palate. She could taste a sauce and identify exactly which ingredient was missing, which ratio was off, which technique would elevate it from good to transcendent. She couldn't execute in a professional kitchen. Her hands weren't fast enough, her timing wasn't sharp enough, but she could create. Every signature dish on Sable's menu had started in Layla's imagination. The foraged mushroom consommé that food writers called ethereal, the heritage pork belly with apple butter that had been photographed for 3 national magazines, the seasonal tasting menu that changed monthly and kept critics coming back again and again. Brennan executed, Layla created. In the early days, he acknowledged this freely. He'd introduce her at events as the soul of Sable. He'd defer to her when critics asked about flavor profiles. He'd hold her hand under the table during press dinners and squeeze it 3 times, their private signal that meant, "I love you." She didn't know it yet, but someone across the ocean had been watching Brennan's rise and waiting for his fall. The shift happened gradually, the way all erosions do. First, it was small things. Brennan started doing interviews alone because Layla didn't like the spotlight anyway. He began referring to the restaurant as my creation instead of our restaurant. He stopped introducing her at parties altogether. There was a moment, she'd remember it later as the turning point, at the James Beard Awards ceremony in New York. Brennan had been nominated for Best Chef Great Lakes. He was one of 5 finalists, and Layla sat in the audience watching her husband work the room like a politician. Someone asked him about the foraged mushroom consommé, the dish that Layla had developed over 6 months of experimentation, a dish born from a childhood memory of her grandmother's soup. He talked for 5 minutes about his creative process, his inspiration, his relentless pursuit of perfection. The audience was captivated. They always were. Layla watched a food writer in the front row lean forward, taking notes. A restaurateur near the back nodded along like he was witnessing genius in real time. Everyone looked at Brennan Whiteley, rising star of Chicago's culinary scene, and saw exactly what he wanted them to see. Nobody looked at the quiet woman in row 12 who'd actually created the dish. After the ceremony, a journalist from Bon Appetit approached Brennan to discuss a potential profile. Layla started to join the conversation. She had insights about the menu, about the philosophy behind the dishes, about what made Sable different. Brennan cut her off with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Honey, why don't you go find us a cab? This might take a while." She stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Her husband had just dismissed her in public, in front of a major publication, like she was his assistant, like she was anyone other than the person who'd made his entire career possible. She found the cab. She didn't know why. She just did. By year 5, Layla had become invisible in her own creation, and that decision would cost him everything. In Brennan had become someone she barely recognized. The hungry, humble dreamer from the wine tasting had been replaced by a man who genuinely believed his own mythology. He bought a Porsche, then traded it for a Ferrari. He started flying first class to food festivals where he was now a featured speaker. He hired a publicist, a personal trainer, a brand consultant who helped him curate his Instagram presence. Layla stayed in the background. She maintained the supplier relationships. She refined the recipes. She answered the 2 a.m. calls from the wine distributor when shipments went wrong. She kept asking about starting a family, about maybe slowing down now that they had money, about building something beyond the restaurant. Brennan kept saying, "Next year." Next year never came. The first time Layla felt truly invisible was at Sable's 5th anniversary celebration. Brennan had rented out the entire restaurant, invited 300 guests, hired a live jazz band, and commissioned an ice sculpture shaped like the restaurant's logo. She'd spent weeks preparing a presentation about the new seasonal menu, dishes she'd developed specifically for this moment, combinations that pushed the boundaries of what their kitchen could achieve. Brennan had promised her 10 minutes to present. When the night came, he gave her 2. 2 minutes, sandwiched between his speech about the restaurant's success and a champagne toast. She rushed through her notes, watching the crowd's eyes glaze over, watching Brennan check his phone in the front row. Afterward, a critic from the Chicago Tribune approached her. He'd been researching Sable's rise and wanted to know more about the creative process behind the menu. Before she could answer, Brennan materialized at her elbow, sliding an arm around her waist. "My wife handles the wine program," he said, steering the critic away. "But if you want to understand the food, the real story, I'm your guy." Layla stood alone by the bar for the rest of the night. A server asked if she was with the catering company. She didn't correct him. That night, she moved to the guest room. Brennan didn't notice for 3 weeks. The interview aired on a Saturday morning. Brennan was featured on a national food show. Layla watched from their living room, coffee gone cold in her hands. The host was charming, deferential. She'd clearly done her research on Sable's accolades, their reservation waitlist, their reputation as one of Chicago's most important restaurants. What she hadn't researched, what nobody ever seemed to research, was who had actually created the food. The host asked about the heritage pork belly, the dish that had become Sable's signature, the one that food writers had called a masterpiece, a dish Layla had developed over 8 months, inspired by her grandmother's recipes from Hunan province. Brennan laughed, that easy, charming laugh that used to make her heart flutter. "The creative process?" he asked, waving his hand dismissively. "That's handled. I focus on execution. I focus on delivering perfection night after night. That's what separates great chefs from home cooks." Great chefs from home cooks. The host smiled and moved on to the next question. She didn't push back. She didn't ask for clarification. Why would she? Brennan Whitley was a rising star, a visionary, the kind of chef who built empires. Home cooks just made food for their families. Layla set down the mug, went to her home office, opened her laptop, started a new folder labeled Exit. The worst part? This was only the beginning. Kira Solvang arrived at Sable on a bright Monday morning in March. She was 25, a semi-finalist from the most recent season of MasterChef, and hungry in that specific way that made established chefs nervous. Her face was recognizable. Millions of people had watched her cook under pressure, had cheered for her during challenges, had debated whether she deserved to win. On paper, she was exactly the kind of talent Sable needed to elevate its profile even further. In reality, she was something else entirely. Layla noticed her on the first day, not because of anything Kira did, she was perfectly professional, perfectly polite, but because of how Brennan reacted to her. He straightened up when she walked into the kitchen. He made excuses to leave the office and observe service from the pass. He laughed at things she said that weren't particularly funny. Kira had 400,000 Instagram followers. She'd been featured in People magazine's 25 Under 25 issue. She represented everything Layla wasn't. Young, famous, telegenic, the kind of person who thrived in spotlights rather than shadows. Layla noticed. Of course she noticed. She'd been married to Brennan for 7 years. She knew his tells, the way his voice changed when he was trying to impress someone, the way he ran his hair through his hair when he was nervous, the way his attention sharpened when he was interested in something. Or someone. But when she mentioned it to Brennan, casually, carefully, testing the waters, he rolled his eyes so hard she thought they might get stuck. Kira, she's a kid, a talented kid with a TV following, sure, but come on, she's good for business, that's all. You're being paranoid. He said paranoid like it was a diagnosis, like she was sick, like her instincts, the same instincts that had built his entire restaurant, couldn't be trusted. She let it go. She shouldn't have. Over the next few months, Layla watched Kira's trajectory at Sable accelerate at a pace that defied logic. Promotions came faster than they should have. Responsibilities expanded beyond what her experience warranted. She was suddenly being invited to menu development meetings, to supplier tastings, to the private strategy sessions where Layla discussed new concepts with Brennan. Then Layla noticed something worse. Brennan was teaching Kira the signature dishes. Not just execution, any line cook could learn execution. He was teaching her the ratios, the techniques, the secrets that Layla had spent years developing. The heritage pork belly, the mushroom consommé, the seasonal preparations that changed with the ingredients, but always followed formulas Layla had created. Kira was taking notes. Detailed notes, the kind of notes someone takes when they're planning to use the information somewhere else. The message was clear, even if nobody said it out loud. Kira was being groomed. For what, exactly? Layla didn't want to admit. He thought he'd won. He was wrong. 3 months later, Layla found the jewelry box. It was stuffed in the pocket of Brennan's blazer, the charcoal Tom Ford he'd bought for the Food and Wine magazine photo shoot. She'd been taking his dry cleaning to the car when she felt the weight of it. A small, velvet box, navy blue, the kind that holds earrings or a bracelet. Not a ring, though, thank God, not a ring. She opened it. Diamond studs, small but real, maybe $3,000, maybe more. Their anniversary wasn't for 4 months. Her birthday had passed in February. He'd gotten her a gift card to a spa she'd never been to. Christmas was 10 months away. She put the box back in his pocket. She drove to the dry cleaner. She sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes, staring at nothing. That night, she asked him about it. She kept her voice light, curious, non-threatening.
He didn't even hesitate. "They're for a vendor," he said, not looking up from his phone. "A thank you gift for that truffle supplier who's been so reliable. You know how it is." She did know how it was. She knew that they'd never given thank you gifts to vendors before. She knew that she handled all vendor relationships, and there was no truffle supplier who warranted a $3,000 present. She knew that her husband was lying to her face with the casual ease of someone who'd done it many times before. "It's for a vendor. You're being paranoid." Kira thought she was learning from a master. She was learning from a thief. The Michelin rumors started circulating in October. Everyone in Chicago's food world had heard the whispers. Inspectors had been spotted at several high-end restaurants. Critics were unusually active. The guide's annual announcement was scheduled for April, and the speculation was that Chicago would gain at least one new starred restaurant. Sable was at the top of every prediction list. Brennan became obsessed. He refinished the dining room, replaced the tableware, hired 2 additional servers. He started doing extra tastings after closing, perfecting every element of the experience. He talked about nothing else. The star, the star, the star. Layla watched his obsession grow and felt nothing. The star had been their shared dream once. Now it was just his. She kept working. She maintained the supplier relationships. She refined the recipes. She answered the calls when shipments went wrong. But something had shifted inside her. She was going through the motions of a life that no longer felt like hers. Then came November. A food writer she knew, someone who'd always been kind to her, who'd always given her credit when others wouldn't, sent her a private message. "I thought you should know. There's a rumor that Kira is planning to leave after the star announcement. She's got investors lined up for her own restaurant, and she's telling people she's taking Sable's recipes with her." Brennan apparently agreed to it.
Layla read the message 3 times. Then she opened the folder labeled Exit. Time to start filling it. What Layla discovered over the next 3 weeks made her smile for the first time in months. Every single exclusive supplier agreement was in her name. The Heritage Pig Farm in Wisconsin, the Foragers in Michigan, the truffle supplier, the seafood distributor. Every critical relationship that made Sable's menu possible, personal connections she'd built over a decade, contracts with clauses that voided exclusivity if she left. Half of Sable's wine list couldn't be replicated because the producers wouldn't sell to anyone else. And the recipes? Brennan had never asked for written documentation. The real secrets, the ratios, the timing, the techniques, lived only in her memory. Kira might have notes, but notes weren't knowledge. She contacted each supplier personally. Quiet conversations. She explained she might be leaving, asked if they'd work with her on future projects. Every single one said yes. Then she made a phone call to Italy, to a man who'd been waiting 9 years. What happened next would destroy everything Brennan had built. The divorce announcement came on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks before Christmas. Layla had made dinner, Brennan's favorite pasta, a peace offering after months of cold silence between them. She'd lit candles. She'd opened a bottle of the Barolo they'd been saving for a special occasion. It felt desperate even as she was doing it, like rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. But some part of her wanted to give him one last chance, one moment to prove she'd been wrong about everything. He walked in, saw the table, inside. Not the reaction she'd been hoping for. "We need to talk," he said. 4 words. 4 words, and she knew. She knew before he said anything else. She knew from the way he wouldn't meet his eyes, from the way he stood in the doorway like he was ready to run, from the way his hand kept drifting toward his phone. "I want a divorce." Just like that. No build-up, no explanation, no "I still care about you" or "this isn't easy for me." Just a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone he used to reject wine samples he didn't like. Layla sat very still. The pasta was getting cold. The candles flickered between them like they were trying to bridge a gap that had grown too wide to cross. "Why?" she heard herself ask. "After everything?" He had the decency to look uncomfortable. At least there was that. "I've evolved," he said. "The restaurant's evolved. And you—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely in her direction. "You haven't." She tried to argue. 8 years. 8 years of building this together. She'd given up job offers, opportunities, her entire career trajectory, all to support his vision. She'd worked 18-hour days. She'd sacrificed sleep and friendships and her own ambitions. She'd poured everything she had into a foundation he'd built his reputation on. He cut her off. "You handled suppliers," he said. "I created an empire. There's a difference." The candles burned down while they talked. The pasta went cold. The wine sat untouched. Layla listened to her husband explain in calm and patient terms why she was no longer sufficient for the life he wanted to live. She wasn't exciting enough, wasn't photogenic enough, didn't fit the image of the woman who should be standing next to Brennan Whiteley, celebrity chef, at awards ceremonies and magazine photo shoots. She wasn't enough. He even had the audacity to frame it as a favor. "You'll be happier," he said. "We both will. You can find someone who appreciates this." He gestured at the carefully set table, the homemade dinner, the effort she poured into one last attempt at connection. Someone who wants the quiet life. By the time he left, he had a meeting with the publicist he couldn't miss. Layla was sitting alone at a beautifully set table, surrounded by the remnants of a marriage she hadn't realized was already dead. She sat there for a long time. The candles burned out. The darkness crept in. She pulled out her phone and dialed Milan.
Theo answered on the second ring. "It's time," she said. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Brennan had hired Morrison and Associates, a firm known for representing wealthy Chicagoans in high-asset divorces. Their lead attorney, a woman named Catherine Voigt, had a reputation for finding hidden assets, exploiting prenuptial technicalities, and leaving opposing spouses with nothing but debt and regret. Her nickname in Chicago legal circles was the Shark. She'd earned it. Layla couldn't afford anything close to that. Her name wasn't on most of Sable's paperwork. Brennan had always handled the business side, and Illinois was an equitable distribution state. But equitable didn't mean equal, especially when your spouse had spent years burying assets in LLCs and investment accounts you never knew existed. The first mediation session was a massacre. Catherine Voigt walked Layla through the corporate structure with the patient condescension of a teacher explaining arithmetic to a slow child. She showed her the documents she'd never seen, proving that her contributions had been compensated as consulting fees. Her modest salary, the attorney explained, was her payment. The equity she thought she'd been promised? There was no paper trail, no signed agreements, nothing but her word against Brennan's. And in a room full of lawyers billing by the hour, her word was worthless. She got the Subaru. She got the studio apartment, technically a buyout of her share of their Lincoln Park townhouse, but the amount was insulting. She didn't get a small cash settlement that would cover maybe 8 months of living expenses if she was careful. She didn't get any stake in the restaurant. She didn't get acknowledgement of her creative contributions. She didn't get credit for a single dish she'd developed. Brennan's attorneys had argued, successfully, that her contributions were work for hire, that as a consultant to Sable, she'd already been compensated through her fees. The fact that she'd worked for below-market rates for years, that she'd deferred compensation in favor of promises that Brennan now claimed she'd never been made, none of that mattered. What mattered was the paperwork, and the paperwork told a story where Layla was just another vendor who'd gotten above her station. On paper, she was walking away with almost nothing. Her attorney, an overwhelmed public defender named Marcus, who'd taken the case as a favor, actually apologized after the final session. "I did what I could," he said. "I'm sorry it wasn't more." Layla told him it was fine. She meant it. Brennan didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. During their final mediation session, he actually smiled at her. That same charming smile from the wine tasting, now weaponized. "No hard feelings," he said. "You'll land on your feet. You always do." He reached out to shake her hand. A business deal concluded. A partnership dissolved. 8 years reduced to signatures on paper and a patronizing handshake. She didn't respond. She just signed where her attorney pointed and kept her face completely neutral. When they left the building together, some cruel administrative requirement that they exit at the same time, she could feel Brennan watching her. She could feel him waiting for the breakdown, the tears, the accusations, the desperate plea for him to reconsider. She gave him nothing. He was practically bouncing as they walked toward the exit. She could see him already composing the text to Kira, could imagine the celebration they'd have tonight, champagne and self-congratulation, and plans for a future that wouldn't include the quiet, invisible woman who'd made all of it possible. She walked past her old Subaru without a glance. She walked to the curb. She waited. The Range Rover pulled up exactly when she'd planned. Brennan stopped mid-stride. His phone was halfway to his ear.
The smile froze on his face as he watched his ex-wife, his boring, background, forgettable ex-wife, step into the passenger seat of a $150,000 vehicle. Through the tinted windows, she could see his confusion turn to recognition. Then recognition turned to something that looked almost like fear. Theo Marchetti, the man Brennan had betrayed 9 years ago, the man with 2 Michelin stars.
Brennan saw a broken woman walking out of that building. He should have looked closer. What Brennan never knew, what he wouldn't piece together until it was far too late, was that Layla had started planning her exit long before he'd started planning his. The folder labeled Exit had become a blueprint. Small transfers to an account in her maiden name, consulting income from side projects Brennan never noticed. His indifference was her greatest asset. By the time he asked for the divorce, she had a year of runway. She couldn't take Sable's recipes legally, but her palate lived in her memory, her understanding of what made a dish transcend from good to extraordinary. That couldn't be documented in any contract. She called it vero, Italian for true. Everything Sable should have been. Authentic, soulful, built on flavors rather than Instagram aesthetics. The worst nights were the best for creating. Every dish she conceived was proof he was wrong. By November, she had a concept. By December, she had a partner. The third part, finding the right collaborator. Theo Marchetti had 2 Michelin stars in Milan. He'd rebuilt his career after Brennan pushed him out, and had developed a reputation for mentoring talented women in an industry that overlooked them. She reached out through a wine importer who'd worked with both. The email was direct. I know who actually created Sable's menu. I know what Brennan did to you. I have something better. Theo responded in 3 hours. They met over video call, Milan to Chicago. She walked him through Vero. By the 2nd hour, he'd stopped asking questions. By the 3rd, he was sketching menu ideas. Brennan always was better at taking credit than earning it, Theo said. And you were always the ghost in the kitchen, the name nobody mentioned. She bristled. That came out wrong, he said. I recognized your work, the flavors. I could taste you in those dishes even when Brennan claimed them. I should have reached out years ago. It's not too late. He nodded. So let's do something about it. Theo flew to Chicago in December. They met in secret, rented a commercial kitchen space outside the city, worked through her concepts, refined the techniques, built something neither of them could have created alone. They signed partnership papers the week before Christmas. They lined up investors by New Year's. They set a quiet opening date for late spring, enough time for Brennan to destroy himself. Because Layla knew something Brennan didn't. The Michelin inspectors were coming to Sable on December 27th, 3 days after the divorce was finalized. 3 days after every supplier she'd cultivated would receive a very specific phone call. And Layla wouldn't be there to save him. The divorce wasn't an ending, it was a detonator. The Range Rover smelled like leather and possibility. Layla settled into the passenger seat, and Theo pulled away from the courthouse without a word. He didn't ask how she was feeling, he didn't offer false comfort. He just drove, letting the Chicago skyline slide past the tinted windows, giving her space to breathe. The December air was bitter outside, but the car was warm. Christmas decorations blinked from storefronts they passed, red and green lights, wreaths on lamp posts, window displays full of fake snow and manufactured cheer. 3 days until the Michelin inspectors arrived. 3 days until everything changed. After 3 blocks, she exhaled. He tried to shake my hand, she said. That's very Brennan, always performing, even when the curtain's down. Her phone buzzed, then again, then 5 more times in rapid succession. She glanced at the screen. 7 texts from Brennan. Was that Theo Marchetti? Why were you in his car? Layla, answer me. What is going on? I know you're reading these.
Call me. What have you done? The texts kept coming. Question marks, exclamation points, the digital equivalent of panic. She silenced her phone and dropped it in her purse. Shouldn't you answer that? Theo asked. She smiled, the first real smile she'd felt in months. No, I don't think I should. They drove in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, past the Art Institute, past Millennium Park with its crowds of tourists, past the restaurant district where Sable sat like a jewel in Brennan's crown. What are you thinking? Theo asked finally. She watched the city slide by. I'm thinking that I spent 8 years waiting for him to see me, and now I'm glad he never did. The day after Christmas, Brennan threw a staff party at Sable. Not officially a celebration of his divorce. That would have been tasteless even for him, but the timing wasn't lost on anyone. The restaurant had just received a glowing preview in Chicago Magazine. Reservation requests had tripled since the Michelin rumors started. Everything was coming together perfectly. Brennan had every reason to celebrate. He'd freed himself from a wife who was holding him back. He had a new relationship with someone who actually understood his ambition. Someone young, beautiful, famous, and the restaurant he'd built, his restaurant, his vision, his empire, was about to receive the highest honor in the culinary world. He stood in the center of the dining room, champagne glass raised, Kira positioned strategically at his side. She was wearing a dress that cost more than Layla's monthly rent. Diamond studs glinted at her ears, the same earrings Layla had found in Brennan's coat pocket months ago. The picture of success. The picture of a man who'd finally gotten everything he wanted. To Sable, he said, his voice carrying across the room. To an incredible year, and to even bigger things ahead. The staff cheered. The champagne flowed. Someone had connected a playlist to the speakers, and soft jazz filled the space with manufactured elegance. For about 2 hours, everything was perfect. Then the first call came in.
Henrik, the heritage pig farmer in Wisconsin, was on the line. His voice was apologetic but firm. He'd received word that his contract had been terminated, something about the agreement being in Lila's name, something about a clause that voided exclusivity if the primary contact left. He wouldn't be able to supply Sable anymore. He'd already committed his inventory to another buyer. Brannon laughed it off. One supplier. They'd find another. 20 minutes later, the foraging collective called. Same story. Their agreement had been with Lila Chen personally. With her departure, they were free to pursue other opportunities. They'd already signed with someone. Someone who was opening a new restaurant in spring. Brandon stopped laughing. By midnight, his phone had rung 11 more times. The truffle supplier, the seafood distributor, the artisanal dairy farm, the boutique wineries who'd been the backbone of Lila's wine program. Every single critical supplier was gone. Not gone to competitors, gone to the same mysterious new restaurant opening in spring. A restaurant that nobody seemed to know anything about. Brennan stood in his office, staring at the wall of awards and press clippings, trying to understand what had happened. His empire was crumbling and he didn't even know who pushed the first domino. His phone buzzed. A text from Kira. "We need to talk, tonight." Something in her tone made his stomach drop. Kira's exit was brutally efficient. She arrived at his townhouse at 2 a.m., still wearing her party dress, mascara streaked from crying. For a moment, Brennan thought she'd come for comfort, for reassurance that everything would be okay. He was wrong. "I can't do this anymore," she said, standing in his doorway like she was ready to run. "The restaurant is falling apart, the suppliers are gone, and everyone's going to find out about us eventually. I can't have that attached to my brand." Her brand. Brennan stared at her, processing what he was hearing. She wasn't upset about him. She wasn't worried about their relationship. She was worried about her Instagram following, her cooking show opportunities, her carefully curated public image. "What about us?" he managed. Kira actually laughed. It was an ugly sound, nothing like the charming giggle he'd fallen for.
There is no us, Brennan. There was never an us. There was you wanting someone young and famous to make you feel important, and me wanting to learn from a successful restaurant before opening my own. She paused, something flickering across her face that might have been guilt. I'm sorry about Layla. She was nice to me, and I used her recipes to build my investor pitch. That's on me, but I'm not going down with your ship. She left without another word. No goodbye, no explanation, just the sound of her heels clicking down the hallway and a door slamming shut. Brennan stood alone in his living room, surrounded by the expensive furniture and the designer artwork and all the trappings of a life that was rapidly falling apart. She'd used him, just like he'd used Layla. There was a certain poetry in it, though he wasn't capable of appreciating the irony. His phone buzzed, a news alert from a food blog he followed. Rumor, legendary chef Theo Marchetti spotted in Chicago. New venture in the works? His hand started shaking. December 27th arrived with the cold indifference of a Chicago winter. Brennan had been awake for 36 hours. His kitchen was in chaos. Half his line cooks had quit when they learned about the supplier crisis. They could see the writing on the wall. The remaining staff were scrambling to source replacement ingredients, calling every distributor in the Midwest, begging for emergency deliveries. The port they'd found was acceptable, not heritage breed, not from the Wisconsin farm that had supplied them for years, but acceptable. The mushrooms were grocery store quality. The foragers wouldn't return his calls. The wine program was decimated. 3/4 of their signature bottles were no longer available, and the sommeliers were frantically rewriting the pairing menus. And somewhere in the city, at a random restaurant none of them would be able to identify, 2 Michelin inspectors were preparing for dinner. Brandon had called Layla 43 times. 43 times straight to voicemail. He'd texted, he'd emailed, he even sent a message through LinkedIn, which felt pathetic even as he was doing it. Nothing. Silence. She'd blocked him everywhere. The inspectors arrived at 7:30 p.m., a man and a woman, dressed conservatively, speaking quietly to each other as the hostess led them to a corner table. They ordered modestly, the tasting menu, a bottle from the wine list, no special requests. Professional, thorough, impossible to impress with charm alone. The first course went out, in amuse-bouche that had once been stunning, delicate, precise, layered with flavors that built on each other like a symphony. Tonight, it was adequate. The replacement ingredients couldn't replicate what Layla's suppliers had provided. The mushroom consommé, the dish that made Brennan famous, the dish that food writers had called ethereal. Tonight, it tasted like soup. Brennan watched from the kitchen pass, his heart pounding. He could see the female inspector take a sip, pause, take another. Her face revealed nothing, but she made a note on the small pad beside her plate. The heritage pork belly arrived, except it wasn't heritage pork anymore. It was commodity pork, sourced from the distributor who'd been willing to make an emergency delivery. The meat was fine, just fine. The inspector cut a piece, chewed, made another note. By the 5th course, Brennan knew it was over. He could see it in the way the inspectors had stopped talking to each other, in the way they'd pushed their wine glasses aside after the first taste, in the way they'd declined dessert entirely. They paid their check, they left a standard tip, they walked out, without a word. And Brennan's dream of a Michelin star walked out with them. He stood in the empty kitchen after closing, surrounded by the remnants of service, listening to the silence. His sous chefs had gone home, his line cooks had scattered. Even Kira's empty station seemed to mock him. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I'm sorry for everything. He stared at it for a long time. Then he threw his phone against the wall and watched it shatter. Some apologies come too late to matter. The article appeared in the Chicago Tribune 2 weeks later. The Ghost in the Kitchen, the untold story of Sable's secret creator. A veteran food critic had finally told the truth, someone who'd known for years that Layla was the creative force behind Brennan's success. someone who'd been waiting for the right moment to publish what they'd always suspected. The article was devastating. It traced every signature dish back to Layla's notebooks and included a damning comparison of the restaurant's quality before and after her departure. The story went viral within hours. Food Twitter exploded. Industry insiders who'd suspected the truth for years finally felt free to speak. Former colleagues, suppliers, even other chefs came forward with their own stories of Layla's brilliance and Brennan's appropriation. By the end of the week, Brennan Whiteley had become a cautionary tale. The chef who'd stolen credit from his wife, the fraud who'd built a reputation on borrowed genius. The Michelin Guide released their annual ratings the following month. Sable was not included. Neither was Brennan Whiteley mentioned in any capacity. The star he'd spent years chasing had been awarded to someone else, a young chef downtown who'd done everything the right way. And in a quiet corner of Chicago, in a space that was still being renovated, Layla Chen and Tio Marchetti were preparing for their own opening night. Sable closed in March. The official explanation was restructuring. The real reason was simpler. Nobody wanted to eat there anymore. The revelation about Layla had destroyed whatever credibility Brennan had left. Reservation cancellations poured in. The remaining staff quit. The investors who'd been circling pulled their interest. The building that had housed Brennan's empire was sold to a developer who planned to turn it into luxury condos. Brennan's lawyers tried to sue Layla. They argued that she'd interfered with his business relationships, that she'd stolen proprietary information, that her departure had been calculated to cause maximum damage. Every claim fell apart under scrutiny. The supplier contracts had always been in her name. The recipes had never been documented in any company files. She hadn't sabotaged anything. She'd simply left. And it turned out that the brilliant chef of Sable had no idea how his own restaurant actually worked. The irony wasn't lost on the judge, or the press, or anyone watching. The Porsche was repossessed in April. The townhouse went in June, sold at auction for less than he'd paid for it, every penny going to creditors who'd lined up around the block. By July, Brennan was renting a studio apartment in the suburbs, spending his days sending out resumes that nobody answered, and his nights staring at a wall where his awards used to hang. He'd kept a few things from the old life: a framed magazine cover, a James Beard certificate, a photo of himself at the Sable opening, standing in front of the restaurant like he owned the world. Artifacts of a person who no longer existed. Kira Solvang resurfaced a few months later at a mid-sized restaurant in Phoenix, line cook position, unremarkable salary, the kind of job she would have laughed at a year ago when she was being groomed to steal recipes from Brennan's wife. Her Instagram went private. Her MasterChef fame had faded. The investors she'd courted had disappeared once word got out about how she'd obtained her menu concepts. She'd opened her own restaurant briefly. 3 months of hype followed by brutal reviews. Critics noted that the food was derivative, familiar, like she'd been trying to recreate something she'd never truly understood. The restaurant closed after 4 months. The investors sued for fraud. The case was settled quietly, but the details leaked anyway. She never spoke to Brennan again. When his number appeared on her phone, and it did for weeks after the collapse, she let it ring through to voicemail. She'd listened to one of those voicemails, once, just once.
Kira, please, I need you. We can figure this out together. We can rebuild. You and me, we can... She deleted it before he finished. She didn't need to hear the rest. Some bridges don't just burn, they evaporate. Vero opened on a warm evening in May. The space was intimate, 40 seats, exposed brick, soft lighting that made everyone look their best. No Instagram walls, no celebrity sightings, no ice sculptures or champagne towers, just good food. Honest food. The kind of cooking that didn't need gimmicks to impress. Layla stood in the dining room as the first guests arrived, watching strangers settle into chairs, watching servers pour wine from bottles she'd personally selected, watching a dream she'd almost abandoned become real.
Theo was in the kitchen commanding a line of cooks who'd been hand-picked for their talent and their integrity. Half of them were women, 3 of them left Sable when the truth came out, choosing to follow the creator rather than the pretender. The first course went out, a simple amuse-bouche, a single bite that contained more complexity than most restaurants achieved in an entire meal. Layla had developed it during her darkest nights in the studio apartment, when she thought everything was lost. She watched a diner take the bite, watched their eyes widen, watched them turn to their companion and say something she couldn't hear but could guess. "This is incredible." The evening unfolded like a symphony. Each course built on the last. The wine pairings were impeccable. The service was warm without being intrusive. No celebrity chef worked the room. No Instagram influencers documented every bite. Just people eating extraordinary food and feeling for a few hours that the world was exactly as it should be. A food critic from the Tribune was at table 7, the same one who'd written the article that exposed Brennan. He finished his meal, paid his check, and stopped by Layla on his way out. "I've eaten at a lot of restaurants," he said quietly. "This is one of the best meals I've ever had." He paused, something complicated moving across his face. "You should have had credit years ago. I'm sorry it took so long." Layla smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes. "Some stories just take time to tell," she said. "The important thing is that they get told eventually." He nodded and walked out into the May evening. The review he published next week would make reservations impossible to get for months. But that night, standing in her own restaurant, surrounded by people who believed in her, Layla wasn't thinking about reviews or reservations or even revenge. She was thinking about how quiet happiness felt, how different it was from the loud, desperate striving she'd mistaken for love. Summer turned to fall. Vero's reputation grew with each passing month. The food press discovered them, then the national publications, then the international ones. A Japanese food magazine sent a photographer. A British documentary crew requested access for a series on female chefs breaking barriers. Layla declined most interviews. Theo handled the press when necessary, always redirecting attention to her when they tried to make him the story. "That's not how this works," a journalist from Food and Wine who tried to position him as the genius behind Vero. "I execute, she creates, and I'm damn lucky she lets me be part of it." Their professional relationship had evolved, carefully, slowly, the way real things tend to grow. Neither of them rushed it. They'd both been hurt before, and they approached each other with the caution of people who knew what betrayal tasted like. It started small, a hand that lingered too long during a menu tasting, a glance across a crowded kitchen that said more than words could, late nights reviewing reservations that turned into conversations about everything except work. She told him about her grandmother's recipes. He told him about the years he'd spent rebuilding after Brennan's betrayal. They discovered they laughed at the same things, worried about the same things, dreamed about the same things. Their first official date was unremarkable on purpose. A small Italian restaurant, a corner booth, no photographers, no industry gossip, just 2 people who'd found something unexpected in the wreckage of their past lives. "I never wanted to be famous," Layla said, twirling pasta around her fork. "That was always his thing." Theo smiled. "I know. That's one of the things I like about you." She raised an eyebrow. "One of them?" He didn't answer. He just reached across the table and squeezed her hand 3 times. She froze. He noticed. "What?" She shook her head, blinking away something she refused to call tears. "Nothing, just someone used to do that. It meant something." "We can find a different signal," he said quietly. "Something that's just ours." She thought about it. Then she squeezed back 4 times. He tilted his head. "Better architecture," she said. "Improved design." He laughed. She laughed too. The first real laugh in a very long time. The Michelin announcement came on a Tuesday in April. Layla was in the kitchen when the call came. Theo answered, his face growing carefully blank as he listened. She watched him, trying to read his expression, trying to prepare herself for disappointment. He hung up, looked at her, said nothing. "Well?" she demanded. He walked over slowly, took her hands, looked into her eyes. "1 star," he said. And they specifically mentioned he had to stop, clear his throat, start again. They specifically mentioned the creative vision of the chef who developed the menu. They mentioned you by name. Layla stood very still. The kitchen was quiet around them, the prep cooks watching, waiting. 1 star. She didn't cry. She smiled instead, that radiant smile Brennan had never bothered to notice, but that Theo saw every day. "We did it," she said. "You did it," he corrected. "I just helped." She squeezed his hands 4 times. "We did it," she repeated. "Together." He saw her one more time. She was on the cover of a food magazine, one of the glossy national ones that Brennan used to dream about appearing in. She was photographed in Vero's kitchen, standing at the pass, with Theo visible in the background, the Michelin star plaque displayed prominently on the wall behind her. The headline read, "The Architect." Not the chef's wife, not the supplier coordinator, not the invisible woman behind the successful man. The Architect. Brennan read the article 3 times in the break room of the steakhouse where he now worked as a line cook. Each time hurt more than the last. She'd never been boring. She'd never been not enough. She'd been building something extraordinary right under his nose, and he'd been too busy looking at himself in the mirror to notice. The woman he dismissed as just a supplier contact had become the architect of something he could never have built. The quiet wife he'd traded in for a younger, more famous model was now more celebrated than he'd ever been. And the worst part, he couldn't even hate her for it. She hadn't cheated, she hadn't lied, she hadn't sabotaged anything, really. She just left. And his entire empire had crumbled because he'd never bothered to understand how it actually worked. He'd done this to himself. His phone buzzed. A text from his shift manager. "Break's over. Table 12 needs their steaks." He put the magazine down, straightened his apron, and went back to work. On a quiet Sunday evening in October, Layla stood on the balcony of her new apartment, a proper one this time, with actual rooms and a view of the lake, and watched the sun set over Chicago. Theo was inside, attempting to make risotto from her grandmother's recipe. She could hear him muttering in Italian, arguing with the instructions she'd written out by hand. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry for everything." She looked at it for a long time. Then she deleted it, blocked the number, and went back inside to help Theo salvage dinner. Some chapters don't need responses. They just need endings. She didn't just survive. She built something better. Someone better found her. And Brennan learned that empires built on someone else's work have a way of crumbling. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.